Men gift basket up the stairs of the temple. Inside was a script from the episode signed by the cast, a Mad Men baseball jacket, and a signed 8x10 of John Hamm, whose agent was Jewish and rode the stationary bike next to Allison at spinning class. Allison knew that this basket would bring in a large donation, not as large as the walk-on appearance on Entourage, but more than the gift certificate for life coaching or the introductory class at Pilates Silver Lake. She had left the basket on the counter in the kitchen this morning so that Seth would see it. She busied herself with Sophie's lunch so that she'd be looking away when he noticed it. And he did notice it. And she briefly swelled with pride that he was aware of her successes at the temple, that he was pleased with her role there, as he had been when she made latkes on Hanukkah or served hot lunch at the day school. She was exhausted from co-chairing the silent auction, which she did with Tamara Weiss, for whom being Jewish was as easy as waking up. But it was worth it for the times that Seth beamed at her and slipped his hand to the small of her back and kissed her on her hair, which was the color of the corn silk in the fields she rode her bike past in her Iowa summers. Allison thought of marriage as a kind of religion, a state that required sacrifice and leaps of faith. She knew that many marriages were a struggle, two people competing for a resource that was ever dwindling. But she had given herself over to her marriage with a full heart and knew that the very safety of her daughter depended on it. Each day that she entered the temple, she struggled to find ease, sometimes instructing her to inhale and exhale, as if to fill her very lungs with the Judaism within the walls. It was to Sophie a second home. She skipped through the halls with ownership. In the sanctuary, she ran to the balcony to play with the other children without fear of reprisal by a rabbi who kept them in his line of sight. Tamara tucked the donated basket into the cabinets they had designated for storage before the carnival. They had arranged for a slide and a moon bounce and vendors to sell Hebrew national hot dogs and Chinese chicken salad. But the auction was consistently the biggest fundraiser and brought in some $30,000 a year for the day school scholarship fund. Allison was proud of her role in it and had found her dormant producer skills were useful in the task. We'll meet again on Friday after drop-off, offered Tamara. Allison was entering the date into her iPhone when it rang in her hand. Hello? She held a finger up to Tamara, who indicated an invisible watch that she had to go. The voice at the other end was frantic and hard at first to understand. Allison, this is Debbie from the day school. Sophie's okay. Allison's body reacted at once and she tried to focus. I'm here, she said. Did somebody call you? Steffi asked. The confusion led to a further delay in understanding. And Steffi asked, how did you know? What is it? Allison said, fighting to keep her voice from rising, walking now more briskly toward the classroom where Sophie had gone to K through 5. Sophie fell. She's fallen. And Allison ran first to the office where she found Steffi still holding the other end of the phone, and then, following Steffi's waving arms down to the back stairs to the yard, Allison saw her first through the upstairs window, the class and teachers in a horse-shaped tableau around a fallen Sophie, her head in the arms of her teacher, the yard aide pressing the rush of children back and away as they raised themselves on tiptoe to see her better. Sophie's skin was the color of snow, bloodless. The phone fell from Allison's hand, and she, in 5 quick strides, was beside her daughter. She cradled her and began talking in a voice that betrayed nothing. Hi, Mommy, said Sophie, eyes wide. Hi, baby, said Allison, casual, upbeat. How's it going? This earned Allison a smile, which she held while she ran the math of the height of the structure and the firmness of the concrete. I fell. Yeah, you did. And with that, Sophie's head fell back and her muscles lost their hold. Allison grabbed her daughter more fiercely and demanded her consciousness. Sophie moaned like a dreamer, and Allison scolded her. Sophie! Her eyes opened, and Allison hoisted her. Allison came face to face with the day school principal, who seemed terrified, as if calculating litigation. "Should we call an ambulance?" she asked weakly. Allison ignored her. She knew the distance to the Cedars, where Sophie had been born. She could be there in 4 minutes. Tamara was 5 strides ahead of Allison, ran to start the minivan. Tamara navigated the LA grid with the skill of a carpooler and managed it with her head turned back to Allison, who cradled Sophie in the back seat. Allison concentrated on fixing the attention on Sophie's eyes. She asked her questions she'd been asked after a car accident she had driving one winter on an icy road at home. "Do you know what day it is, Sophie?" "Fuck a bunch of you," suggested Tamara. The clutch of drivers impeded her progress. "Sorry, Sophie." "What day is it, honey?" Sophie said nothing and closed her eyes as if sleepy. Allison squeezed her shoulders and she came back to her. "Tuesday," she said. Then, "Because Scrubs is on." "Good girl," said Allison. The answer brought tears to her eyes. Tamara lay on the horn and crossed La Cienega at a diagonal. Sophie's eyes shut like a sleeper. "Who's the president, baby?" Allison pressed her. A smile formed on her lips, her eyes still closed. "Oh." Sophie's eyes opened, and she looked straight at her mother as if to speak, and her eyes rolled back in her head. Allison felt the fabric of her daughter's T-shirt dampen. Tamara took the next turn riding over the curb. "We're here, we're here." Allison saw the white Star of David that identified Cedars as they rounded the corner to the Beverly Center. Tamara directed the van into the bay of the ER, threw the van into park, and ran around to open the door for Allison as she carried her daughter into the ER. "Call Seth," Allison called back to Tamara as she ran with the child through the automatic doors. Allison was surrounded at once by people, calm in their urgency, who took her daughter from her arms and shifted her onto a cotton sheet gurney. Seth arrived 20 minutes later with Ginny, his assistant, who used his iPhone to Google the doctor, who performed the surgery to reduce the intracranial pressure resulting from the fall. Allison and Seth waited in the Disney-sponsored pediatric waiting room and took turns making the short walk across the room, returning to each other to lay one hand over the other's. Seth twice called his parents back east, who didn't know anything yet. 4 hours later, the doctor stepped out of the cheerfully painted doors to tell them that Sophie was out of the woods and in recovery. Later in the room that they had assigned to Sophie, a plastic bag with her shoes and clothes on the sill, Seth and Allison gasped when their daughter briefly opened her dark eyes and spoke to them. For the next dozen hours, the couple took turns watching their daughter sleep. When it was Seth's turn, Allison stepped quietly out of the room to get him a Starbucks. She walked through the hall onto the plaza level and, without intending to, pulled open the heavy door and entered the chapel. The sound of the hospital receded behind her, and she took a seat on one of the empty wooden pews. In the spare room, which offered, depending on the hour, reassurances of both rabbi and priest, Allison sat alone trembling as her body registered the crisis averted, dropped her head in gratitude,